Hi everyone, welcome back to the bindery. In this video I'll be making some furniture for this medieval Gothic binding I'm working on. And I don't mean tables or chairs. Furniture is the term given to any of the metalwork that was attached to the covers of medieval books. I've got 8 corner guards and a clasp to make, so let's head down to the basement shop and get started. The brass sheet I'm using is 32 thousandths of an inch thick, or about 0.8 millimeters. I already cut out one blank from my pattern piece, so I'll use that to lay out the rest. I then rough out the blanks with a hacksaw. Sorry about the noise. If you'd rather just watch some peaceful bookbinding, I'll put a link to my video on the making of this medieval book above. With the blanks all cut out, I'll transfer the outline of the design using some indelible marker and a scribe. Then using a jeweler's saw, I cut out each piece as close as I can to the scribe line. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I do have to be careful to stay on the outside of the line. Eventually I find a rhythm and soon all 8 are cut out. Boy, I wish it was really that fast. Next it's on to the file work. I use a variety of needle files to refine the saw cuts and work the edges down to the scribed lines. I use mainly flat files on the straight edges and the convex curves, with a little bit of square or even triangle file work to sharpen up the inside corners. It's a slow process, and with 8 blanks to do, it takes quite a while, but eventually I get them all done. I'm pretty happy with the consistency of those. They're not machine cut perfect, but they don't have to be. Each blank needs a series of holes drilled, so I'll transfer the locations for those by taping each blank to the pattern and then punching them with an awl. Some of the holes are for mounting to the covers, while others will be for decorative use. I drill them all out using a cordless drill and a tiny drill bit, which is just 52 thousandths of an inch in diameter or 1.32 millimeters. The sides of the corner guards need to be bent at a 90-degree angle to wrap around the edges of the covers. I scribe where the bends will need to be made using my calipers. This brass is too thick to just bend it over and get a sharp, accurate edge, so I need to remove some material along the inside faces. I use a clamp and a piece of hardwood with a 45-degree bevel as a guide to then file a V-notch along my scribed mark. I start with a large double-cut file and finish with a triangular file, trying my best to keep the depth of this cut consistent. I file the second line in the same way and then cut out the waste bit in the corner with my fret saw. A quick bevel on the inside faces will hopefully help make a nice finished corner. If I've done my job well, I should be able to just bend the edges over by hand. I'm not worried about the brass breaking so long as I get a good bend on the first try. Repeatedly bending the metal back and forth could weaken it and lead to cracking. Thankfully everything went well and this looks pretty good. I did toy with the idea of soldering these joints, but it seems a little bit excessive. Just the same, this corner isn't as tight as I would like, so I'll try another approach. Using a bit of scrap steel as a miniature anvil, I use a ball-peen hammer to, peen over the mitered corner from each side, molding the metal together. Once filed down, this joint becomes all but invisible, and because the brass is quite thick, the joint is surprisingly strong. Okay, next up is a process called dapping or sinking. My homemade tool consists of a piece of round bar that I've radiused on one end, which seats into a smaller diameter bearing that I've mounted into a wooden jig. My brass corner guard goes into the jig and is clamped down with the upper guide piece on top. The hole in the upper guide is positioned exactly where I want the raised dome to be on the corner guard. I drop in the die and bang away a few times with a hammer, turning the die as I go to try to even out any inconsistencies. I'm showing you all of this in real time to give you an idea of how little time it actually takes. That looks not too bad, but it's a bit off-center, so I'll freehand hammer it with the die on a few different angles just to finish it off. I'm really pleased with how these are looking. I'm honestly surprised with how consistent a result I can get with this homemade jig. Now it's time to go on to enlarging some of these pierced holes. I clamp the workpiece with some wood in a machinist's vise to keep my fingers clear and then drill out the holes on the drill press. The first decorative piercing can be done with a small half-round file. The bit of metal between the two holes on the end gets filed away to form two sharp points on the inside. For the other two piercings, I lay out the design with marker and a scribe. Then I pass the blade of the fret saw through one of the holes, tighten it up, and then I can saw out the design. Obviously I'm cutting out a lot of the process just to show you the steps that I go through. In reality it took many, many hours to make these. With the piercings cut, I now have a whole lot of fiddly file work ahead of me to touch up any rough spots and soften all the edges. These parts are so small that I need to work really slowly, removing just tiny shavings of metal at a time. To add a little more life and depth to these pieces, I file wide bevels on both the pointed end and the inner shoulders. I don't know if they're really shoulders, they just seem like they should be called shoulders. At this stage I checked the corner pieces on the actual book and decided that they need some further shaping to better fit the inner bevel of the book's covers. Another random bit of steel that I've filed into shape acts as a good stand-in for the book's cover, and can stand up to a little bit of hammering better than the book itself. Once again I peen over the brass, this time creating a subtle secondary bend. It looks pretty rough coming straight off the hammer, but a bit of judicious file work will set things right. You may have noticed that some of these corner pieces have only one bent edge. Those pieces are for the corners adjacent to the book's spine, while the double-edged guards are for the outer four-edge corners. All this filing makes a surprising amount of shiny dust. So with the corner guards done, it's time to move on to the clasp. I make a cardboard template of my design and transfer that onto the brass sheet. I need 2 of these for the front and back plates of the clasp. As before, I cut them out with a fret saw, then file them down to the scribed lines. Yay, more filing! Just like with the corners, I file in some bevels to give these a little bit more life. Here I'm using a couple of different half-round files to make this concave section. It's a bit premature, but I just can't resist giving these a quick polish with some fine sandpaper. I'm pretty happy with how those are looking. I scribe and cut a strip of brass for the arm of the clasp, then break out the blowtorch to start forming the barrel of the hinge. This does result in some marring from the pliers on the soft metal, but since my attempts at cold rolling this part were terrible, I just accepted the extra file work and went for it. I take my time and gradually bend that into shape. That looks pretty acceptable. Then I cut away the outer edges of the barrel so it will fit with the backplate later. I want to make this clasp a real focal point for the book, so I lay out some lines to do some metal carving. I'm aiming for sort of a twisted cord pattern that is reminiscent of the actual thongs that are used in the binding itself. I'll use a good square file to file in the diagonal lines first. I gradually bring the design into shape with a variety of files and a whole lot of perseverance. Again, a little bit of sandpaper helps to give an idea what the finished look will be. The backplate needs to have its own barrel formed as well. I decided to cut this one out first and then bend each side of the barrel separately, since I'd already finished the shaping and sanding on this piece and I didn't want to risk bending it all out of shape. That plan worked out pretty well, and the barrel just needs a bit of fine-tuning with the files. I test the fit. It looks pretty good. So I'll just refine the curves there. The metal tends to flare out a little bit when it's bent around, so file work brings it back to flat. A finishing nail acts as a temporary pin to test out the action of the hinge. To make the actual pin, I take a piece of scrap brass and mark it with the diameter that I need. Sorry about the noise there. That is awful. Then I gradually file it down until it's the right diameter. I cut it off and form a head on one end, and then cut it to a generous length. I test the fit of the pin, and with that looking good, I can move on to the front plate. So the front plate needs to have a hole that will accept the hook of the clasp arm. A spare washer provides a convenient radius for it. Then I drill it, saw it, file it. You know the routine. I use the opening that I've just made on the front plate to mark the width of the hook on the clasp, then I cut and file that to size 2. I formed the hook here cold using pliers rather than with the torch because I felt that doing it hot would be a bit too complicated and risky. I thought the odds were pretty good that I would burn myself, so I just did it cold. I also cut the front plate to size, leaving just a straight bar of metal at the front for the hook to catch over on. I also trim the hook to size, and then I test the fit. The last of the real metalwork is to just drill the attachment holes in both the front and back plates. Then we're on to the long, tedious stage of sanding all these parts. I've got a variety of grits of sandpaper from 280 up to 800 grit. Starting at the lowest grit, I work to remove any file marks, and then I gradually work my way up through the grits of sandpaper to remove any fine scratches left by the previous grit. I'm using either a thin wooden wedge as a backer for my strip of sandpaper, or a flexible strip of thick leather that works better for around the contours. Finally, I use a bit of 4-0 steel wool to buff the brass up to a soft luster. Three down, 5 to go. You get to watch me polish this corner in just a few seconds, but in reality this is about 15 minutes worth of footage. And a lot of sandpaper. For the inner contours of the faceplates, I use a dowel as a backer for my sandpaper. You can also see that this process does wonders for your skin. It was about at this point that I realized that I failed to account for the outer bevel of the book's covers, and then using some highly calibrated instruments, I bend them to the correct angle. The clamp arm gets a good sanding and polish as well. And then I install the brass hinge pin and cut it off just a bit longer than I need. This leaves just enough metal to peen over the end. Once again, I'm using another piece of scrap steel as a bit of an anvil here. I gradually peen over the brass end, and then sand and polish that as well. Alright, so that's it for actually making the furniture. If you'd like to see the entire project of making this medieval book, I'll put a link down below. If you've enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and consider subscribing so that when I produce more videos, you'll be the first to know. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next video.